The world watched in awe as the first alien ship descended into Earth's atmosphere. Massive, metallic, and shimmering with an otherworldly glow, it hovered silently over the Pacific Ocean, casting an eerie shadow over the waters below. News outlets around the globe broadcasted the event live. People from every corner of the world held their breath, united in both wonder and fear. This was the moment humanity had long speculated about, but never truly believed would come to pass. The aliens aboard the ship, later identified as the Tellurians, were humanoid, but their appearance was unsettling. A tall, lithe form, with silvery gray skin and elongated features. Their eyes were wide, black pools that seemed to absorb the very light around them, unsettling anyone who looked into them for too long. They spoke through a universal translator, their voices smooth and calm, promising peace and cooperation. "We come in peace," their leader, a being named Vilarun, announced. "We offer you the knowledge of the stars, medical breakthroughs that will cure your most deadly diseases, and the power to reshape your civilization." The world's leaders, initially hesitant, were quickly swayed by the Tellurians' promises. A council of nations was formed to negotiate with the visitors, hoping to extract as much information as possible from the aliens' superior technology. Their arrival seemed almost too good to be true, but many believed that the benefits far outweighed the risks. Humankind was on the brink of an era of unparalleled advancement. Yet, behind closed doors, there were whispers of doubt. General Eleanor Hayes, the head of Earth's United Military Forces, was among the few who questioned the Tellurians' true intentions. While the world reveled in the advances they brought, Hayes found herself troubled by the way the aliens held themselves, aloof, distant, and always on the move. Their technology was beyond anything humanity had ever seen, but every encounter with them left her feeling uneasy. It wasn't just their appearance. It was the way they spoke, how their words felt calculated, too smooth, almost as if they were reading from a script. "I don't trust them," Hayes confided to her deputy one evening as they reviewed intercepted communications between the Tellurians. "We've seen nothing but manipulation in their offers. What they say is one thing, what they do is another." Her fears, though, were dismissed by most. The United Nations, in particular, was eager to enter into trade agreements. The promises of free energy, disease eradication, and space exploration blinded most leaders to the very real dangers that lurked beneath the surface of the Tellurians' promises. But General Hayes was not one to ignore her instincts. She dug deeper, using her position to access classified files that hinted at disturbing data. Hidden among the benevolent gestures were traces of something darker. The Tellurians were not just here to help. They were testing the waters, assessing humanity's weaknesses, perhaps even preparing to strike. It wasn't until the Tellurian ships began silently circling Earth in larger numbers that Hayes' suspicions became undeniable. And then, the worst possible news arrived. The Tellurians weren't here to help. They were here to conquer. The first strike came without warning. It was late at night when the Tellurian ships, having hovered above Earth for weeks, finally made their move. The skies darkened as dozens of massive vessels, each the size of an aircraft carrier, broke through the atmosphere in perfect unison. Their silvery hulls glowed with an unsettling light as they positioned themselves over major cities around the globe. New York, Beijing, Moscow, Rio de Janeiro, and dozens of others. At first, the world thought it was another display of alien technology, a grand spectacle. Then, without a sound, the ships released beams of intense energy that decimated entire city blocks in an instant. The air crackled with heat, and buildings collapsed into dust as if a giant hand had swept across the cities. The night turned into day as flames lit the sky. Humanity was caught off guard, unprepared for the sheer scale of the devastation. Governments scrambled to respond, but it was already too late. Entire cities vanished in a matter of minutes. The alien ships were too fast, too powerful. Earth's most advanced weaponry had no effect on the invaders. Tanks, fighter jets, and missiles were rendered useless. Nothing more than sparks and debris in the wake of the alien onslaught. The Tellurians didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their actions spoke louder than words ever could. The message was clear. Humanity's time was up. General Eleanor Hayes watched from the war room as the destruction unfolded on the global feeds. Her heart raced, but her mind remained cold, calculating. This was no longer the peaceful first contact she had once hoped for. This was war. But how could humanity possibly fight back against such an overwhelming force? "Get me the president," Hayes snapped, her voice steel. Now. Meanwhile, on the ground, panic spread like wildfire. In the heart of New York City, people were running, screaming, caught in a nightmare they couldn't escape. A family huddled in an underground subway station as explosions reverberated through the concrete above them. A young woman, clutching her child, watched the sky flicker with strange lights before everything went black. In the chaos, some found clarity. Amidst the terror and confusion, the first human resistance groups began to form. Survival, at first, was all that mattered. A handful of soldiers, trained for war, but not for this, banded together with civilians, engineers, and scientists. They sought refuge in underground bunkers, using whatever technology and weapons they could scrounge up to hold back the invaders. But humanity was already on the back foot, and they knew it. The first global response was a call for unity, a plea for all nations to set aside their differences and fight as one. Leaders from across the globe convened in hastily arranged emergency sessions, realizing that the only hope for survival was to pool their resources and intelligence. The world's military forces, scattered and disjointed, rallied behind one purpose: to stop the Tellurians before they could wipe out the last remnants of human civilization. But the task seemed impossible. Earth's weapons were no match for the invaders. The Tellurians were simply too advanced. General Hayes watched as reports flooded in. The damage was incomprehensible. But there was something else in those reports, something hidden in the patterns of the Tellurian attacks, a vulnerability. In the midst of the destruction, Hayes felt a flicker of hope. The aliens might have superior technology, but humanity had something they didn't: ingenuity. She had a plan, but for now, it would remain a secret, known only to those few who still believed that humanity could fight back. And so, the war began, not with an all-out assault, but with small sparks of resistance. Humanity, desperate and bruised, had no choice but to claw its way back. In the ruins of what was once the United Nations headquarters, General Eleanor Hayes convened with a group of the world's brightest minds: scientists, engineers, and military strategists. The devastation around them was impossible to ignore. Cities lay in ruin, the air thick with the scent of burning metal and the ash of what had once been the beating heart of civilization. Yet there was a spark of something else now, something humanity had forgotten in its years of complacency: hope. "We don't have much time," Hayes said, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "The Tellurians are getting bolder. We need to hit them where it hurts." The table was strewn with maps, data, and hastily scribbled notes. A young, scrappy engineer named Alexia Kwan spoke up, her voice laced with urgency. "General, I've been analyzing the Tellurian tech. Their ships, they're using a type of energy field to protect themselves from our attacks. But it's not perfect. There are small pockets where it's weaker, specifically around the power nodes." Hayes leaned forward. "So, you're saying they have a weakness?" "Yes," Alexia said. "Their shields are strong, but not invincible. We can break through, but it'll take something unconventional." "What do you need?" Hayes asked, already knowing the answer. The desperation in the air was palpable. There were no more easy solutions left. "We need time and access to their tech, and we need weapons that can exploit their shield gaps," Alexia replied, her eyes flashing with determination. "I have a plan, but it's going to be dangerous. We'll need to infiltrate one of their command ships and get a direct look at how their energy systems work." The idea of an infiltration mission into a heavily fortified alien vessel was almost laughable, but the situation was dire enough that it seemed their only option. After a long silence, Hayes nodded. "We'll make it happen. I'll assemble a team." Meanwhile, across the world, human forces were already beginning to mount sporadic attacks, each more audacious than the last. Small resistance groups, initially fragmented and uncoordinated, were now communicating via underground channels. These scattered efforts, born from necessity, were starting to form a loose network. The human resistance had begun to coalesce into something far more organized. Captain Jack Donovan, a former Navy SEAL, led a small band of elite fighters deep into what was once the heart of Washington, D.C. now a wasteland. It served as the base for a new kind of war, guerrilla tactics that relied on the very chaos the Xalorians had wrought. Donovan's team used hit-and-run tactics, striking alien convoys and then vanishing into the ruins, making it clear that no matter how much the Xalorians had advanced, humanity would never be an easy target. Back in the Resistance headquarters, Alexia Kwan and her team of engineers worked around the clock, reverse engineering Xalorian tech with the materials they had salvaged. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that humanity had one thing the Xalorians could never anticipate: the drive to survive, to innovate under pressure. Weeks passed, and though humanity had lost many battles, they had begun winning the war of ingenuity. A modified human-made energy weapon was crafted, a hybrid of alien technology and human know-how, and it was ready. The first test came on the edge of a fallen city, where a Xalorian transport ship hovered, unaware of the impending assault. With a hum, the weapon activated, and a blast of concentrated energy shot toward the ship. It hit the weak spot on its shield. The ship trembled, then cracked, and with an explosion of light, it fell from the sky. The humans had made their first significant dent in the alien armor. It was a small victory, but one that could change everything. The tide was turning. The Xalorians, having underestimated humanity's resilience, were quick to respond. What had begun as a series of small victories for the human resistance soon escalated into a brutal and unrelenting retaliation. The alien forces, infuriated by their losses, deployed their most terrifying weaponry, genetically engineered super soldiers designed specifically for this war. These creatures, known as the Vihurin, were a chilling blend of Xalorian technology and alien biology, faster, stronger, and more deadly than anything humanity had ever faced. The first encounter with the Vihurin came when a small human resistance cell ambushed an alien convoy in what remained of Chicago. Expecting only regular drones and soldiers, they were blindsided when the convoy was flanked by a squad of Vihurin warriors. The battle was over in minutes. The super soldiers tore through the human fighters with terrifying precision, their speed and strength far outmatching anything the resistance had encountered before. General Hayes watched in horror as the footage of the massacre reached her command center. The Vihurin were more than just soldiers. They were monsters. Every encounter with them ended the same way: swift, merciless, and overwhelmingly brutal. Resistance fighters, once emboldened by their victories, now faced a terrifying truth. The Xalorians had no intention of playing fair. They were adapting, and fast. But the Vihurin weren't the only threat. The Xalorians, now fully aware of humanity's ability to adapt and fight back, had begun deploying a new generation of energy weapons. These weapons, powered by unstable quantum energy, could obliterate entire resistance strongholds in a single blast. Entire cities were wiped from existence with no warning, as the Xalorians began to show just how much firepower they had at their disposal. Despite the overwhelming odds, humanity refused to surrender. The human spirit, now pushed to its limits, only seemed to grow stronger. The resistance began to regroup, using guerrilla tactics and unconventional warfare to stay one step ahead of the Xalorian onslaught. They retreated into underground bunkers, utilizing the vast networks of tunnels beneath the decimated cities to strike from the shadows, then disappear before the Xalorians could retaliate. In the midst of the chaos, Captain Jack Donovan and his elite squad continued their relentless attacks on Xalorian supply lines, slowing the alien forces' advances, but at great cost. They had lost several key members during their operations, each death weighing heavily on Donovan's conscience. But there was no time for mourning. The Resistance was in a race against time. Every day, the Xalorians grew more powerful, their control over Earth tightening. Yet, even in the darkest of times, there was a flicker of hope. Back at the Resistance's command center, Alexia Kwan had cracked a vital piece of the Xalorian code. They now knew the aliens' next move, a final push to annihilate the last remnants of humanity in a coordinated global assault. But Alexia had a plan of her own, one that could change the course of the war. It involved hacking into the alien fleet's control systems, a dangerous and nearly impossible task. The Resistance was on the brink of discovering the Xalorians' greatest weakness, but executing the plan would require a team to infiltrate deep into enemy territory, risking everything. General Hayes paced back and forth, staring at the map that now marked the aliens' movements. "We don't have much time," she muttered. "We hit them now, or we lose Earth forever." But even as she spoke, a horrifying realization dawned on her. The war was no longer just about survival. It had become a fight for everything humanity had built. The Xalorians weren't just invaders. They were a force that sought to erase humanity's legacy entirely. The question now was, could humanity hold on long enough to strike back before it was too late? The Resistance's plan was risky, audacious, and dangerous. A small, hand-picked team would infiltrate the heart of the Xalorian command, deep within one of their flagship vessels orbiting the Earth. Their objective was simple: find the control system that governed the Xalorian fleet and disable it, once and for all. It was a task that seemed impossible, but it was humanity's best shot at turning the tide of the war. Captain Jack Donovan was chosen to lead the operation. A seasoned warrior, Donovan's team had become known for their relentless strikes against the alien invaders. Alongside him was Alexia Kwan, the brilliant engineer who had discovered the weakness in the Xalorian tech, and a handful of elite soldiers who had proven themselves time and time again in battle. The team's plan was to board a downed Xalorian transport vessel, one that had been crippled in a recent attack, and use it as a stealth entry point to infiltrate one of the alien command ships. The Xalorians would never expect humans to infiltrate their flagship, not when so many of their forces were focused on exterminating resistance cells in major cities. It was a risky maneuver, but the element of surprise was their only advantage. As Donovan and his team made their way to the transport ship's wreckage, a sense of grim determination settled over them. They had lost so much already: loved ones, comrades, entire cities. Now they had one chance to turn the tide, but it came at a cost: their lives. "Stay focused," Donovan said as he surveyed the wreckage. "We get in, find the control hub, and get out. No heroics. This isn't about glory, it's about saving humanity." Alexia, her hands already working on the makeshift equipment she had designed, nodded. "We've got one shot at this. The Xalorians won't be expecting us, but they will be ready for any disruption to their control. Once we're on their flagship, we'll have to move fast." The wreckage was eerily quiet. They moved like shadows, slipping between the ruins of the downed ship, avoiding the few remaining Xalorian patrols that were still scouting the area. Every step had to be calculated. The slightest mistake could spell their end. They finally boarded the transport, their way forward lit only by the glow of emergency lights. Alexia quickly got to work, using a hacked Xalorian terminal to override the ship's systems, unlocking the route to the flagship. With a final, resounding click, the hatch opened, revealing the interior of the alien vessel. Donovan felt a chill as they crossed the threshold. The inside of the ship was cold, sterile, and foreboding. Alien technology hummed in the background, a reminder that they were far from home, deep in enemy territory. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, as if the ship was alive. "Keep moving," Donovan ordered, his voice barely a whisper. The team slipped through the corridors, their footsteps muffled by the thick metallic floors. Every corner, every shadow, felt like a potential trap. They had no idea how much time they had before the Xalorians realized their ship had been breached. But their luck held. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the heart of the flagship, the central control room, a vast chamber filled with shimmering screens and alien consoles. It was more impressive than anything they had seen before, the walls lined with crystalline data terminals that pulsed with an unnatural rhythm. Alexia moved quickly to one of the terminals, tapping in a series of complex commands. Her hands were steady despite the high stakes, her mind focused entirely on the task at hand. I'm in. I've located the fleet's central control grid. If I can override this, we can send a shutdown signal to every ship in orbit. Just as Alexia prepared to initiate the override, alarms began to blare. The ship's security system had detected their presence. "We don't have much time," she shouted. Captain Donovan grabbed his weapon, his eyes scanning the room for any incoming threats. "Get it done, Alexia." Now, the fate of humanity rested in their hands. The alarms blared louder now, the metallic screech reverberating through the corridors of the Xalorian flagship. Captain Donovan's grip tightened on his weapon, eyes darting toward every darkened corner, every shadow that might conceal the alien forces. His heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline flooding his system. They had broken into the heart of the Xalorian war machine, but now the stakes were even higher. One wrong move, and the whole team would be wiped out. "Alexia, how long?" Donovan asked through gritted teeth, trying to keep his voice steady. Alexia, hunched over the alien terminal, didn't look up. "It's almost there," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "I'm hacking into the central command. 1 more minute, and I can send the shutdown signal." The rest of the team, weapons raised, stood guard. The alien ship's walls seemed to close in around them, as if the vessel itself was aware of their intrusion. Every flicker of movement felt like the precursor to a hail of gunfire. They couldn't afford to be caught now, not when they were so close. Donovan moved cautiously toward the entrance, scanning for movement. His soldiers had grown eerily quiet, their faces grim but determined. They knew this was their last chance, and failure was not an option. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from the far end of the hallway. It was subtle at first, like a whisper on the wind, but it quickly grew louder. Footsteps. Dozens of them. "Get ready," Donovan barked. The team took their positions, bracing for the inevitable. In the next instant, Xalorian guards flooded the corridor. Tall, armored figures, their faces obscured by sleek helmets, charged forward with a chilling precision. Their weapons crackled with energy as they raised them, ready to strike. The humans barely had time to react before the first blast ripped through the air. Donovan fired back, his shots finding their mark with ruthless efficiency. The Xalorians were powerful, but they were not invincible. The human soldiers, though outgunned and outnumbered, fought like demons. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the future of their species. Alexia's voice rang out from behind the terminal. "I'm in. I'm sending the signal." Just as the Xalorian guards closed in, the lights flickered, and the entire ship seemed to shudder. The control room was bathed in a sudden, harsh glow as Alexia completed the override. "Now," she shouted. A wave of energy surged through the ship's systems, spreading out in all directions. The Xalorian ships in orbit, hovering menacingly above Earth, froze as their central systems were disabled. The once unassailable fleet now hung in space like dormant hulks, their weapons useless, their shields offline. For a moment, there was silence. The Xalorians looked confused, disoriented. They hadn't expected this. The human resistance had done the unthinkable. But it was only a brief respite. "We need to get out now," Donovan shouted, pushing toward the exit. The alien forces were regrouping, and soon they would flood the flagship with reinforcements. Time was running out. Alexia, panting with exertion, backed away from the terminal and ran toward the team. As they retreated, gunfire echoed from behind them. The Silurian soldiers had regained their composure, and they were furious. The team sprinted through the dark hallways, making their way back to the transport ship. Every step felt like an eternity, but they couldn't afford to slow down. They finally reached the transport, but the path was blocked. The entrance had been sealed off by Silurian forces, the hatch thick with alien energy fields. "We've got no time to wait," Donovan said, his voice strained but steady. "We fight our way out." With no other choice, the team turned to face the oncoming Silurian wave. The fight for Earth wasn't over, but humanity had just delivered its first major blow. Now, it would have to fight for its survival. The transport ship's engines roared to life as the team made their escape, narrowly avoiding the incoming fire from Silurian forces. The once silent and impenetrable flagship now seemed to shake under the pressure of humanity's resistance. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. Their mission had succeeded, but the war was far from over. Captain Donovan gritted his teeth, his hand clenched around the control stick. The ship veered off course as explosions rocked the alien vessel behind them, sending shockwaves through the hull. Their escape wasn't going to be easy, not with Silurian ships in hot pursuit. "Hold on," Donovan shouted over the comms. Alexia, still catching her breath from the frantic escape, turned to face him. "We've hit them where it hurts, but we're not safe yet. The Silurians will retaliate. They'll come at us with everything they've got." "I know," Donovan replied, his voice grim. "But we've got the initiative now. We need to hit them while they're vulnerable." The resistance had proven its ability to fight back, but now came the hard part. The Silurians had been stunned by the disruption to their fleet, but they wouldn't stay down for long. The next few days would determine whether humanity's fragile hope could survive the alien onslaught. Back on Earth, the human forces had already begun mobilizing. General Hayes, watching from the underground command center, had no illusions about the battle ahead. "They're regrouping," she said to her officers. "The Silurians will make their next move soon. We need to hit them hard and fast." The world's remaining military forces, scattered and battered, began to coordinate. The resistance had always been a patchwork effort, small, isolated cells of soldiers and civilians, but now they were becoming a true global force. Nations set aside their differences, uniting in the face of the existential threat posed by the Silurians. The human race had no choice but to fight as one. In every corner of the Earth, the resistance launched attacks against Silurian supply lines, weak points in their defenses, and vulnerable outposts. The humans were using guerrilla tactics to their advantage, attacking quickly and retreating before the Silurians could retaliate. Every skirmish, every ambush brought them one step closer to turning the tide. But the aliens were not blind to the growing resistance. In the aftermath of the sabotage to their fleet, the Silurians unleashed their full wrath. Massive fleet reinforcements arrived in Earth's orbit. Their weapons were even more advanced, and their soldiers, furious after the losses they'd sustained, were relentless. It was clear humanity's survival would depend on one last push. As the Silurian fleet advanced, General Hayes made a bold decision. The time had come for the final assault. The resistance would strike directly at the heart of the Silurian command. Their flagship, still floating ominously above Earth. It was a suicide mission for all but the bravest, but humanity had no other choice. "We'll need everything we've got," Hayes said to her commanders. "All remaining forces, this is our last chance." Meanwhile, Captain Donovan and his team had returned to Earth. With the Silurian fleet momentarily crippled, they were tasked with preparing the final counteroffensive. The team had seen the horrors of war firsthand, but now they were the vanguard. This mission was not just about survival. It was about reclaiming the future for humanity. As they gathered in the Resistance's war room, Donovan exchanged a look with Alexia. She was exhausted, but her eyes burned with the same resolve. They had fought against impossible odds before, and they would do it again. This was their moment. "We end this," Donovan said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "For all the people we've lost, for the future of Earth." The time had come. Humanity's fate rested on the shoulders of those brave enough to face the Silurian juggernaut head-on. The final assault had been launched, and General Hayes' forces, bolstered by every resistance cell across the globe, were preparing for the decisive confrontation. The last remnants of the Silurian fleet had gathered in Earth's orbit, their flagship still hovering above, a menacing reminder of their dominance. This would be the last battle. Captain Donovan stood at the forefront, staring up at the sky through the command center's viewing port. The massive, shadowy silhouette of the Silurian flagship loomed in the distance. The alien war machine that had ravaged their world was now the target of humanity's united fury. "How much time do we have?" Donovan asked, his voice low but steady, a sign of the calm before the storm. Alexia, working at a nearby terminal, glanced at the clock. "We've got 15 minutes until the fleet makes its final push. Once we strike, there's no turning back." It was now or never. The resistance forces, having struck from the shadows for months, now had the chance to strike a decisive blow. The plan was simple: assault the Silurian flagship, destroy its command center, and disable its remaining fleet. The task was monumental, but humanity had a secret weapon. The same ingenuity and determination that had allowed them to survive the aliens' onslaught in the first place. The final phase of the plan had begun with the launch of hundreds of homemade warships, small but heavily armed vessels built from scraps of human technology. They were crude, but they were fast. With the help of the best engineers and pilots from every nation, these ships were now humanity's best chance at reaching the heart of the Silurian command. As the human fleet, now in formation, hurtled toward the Silurian flagship, the atmosphere in the command center was electric. Every member of the resistance understood the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just about military strategy. It was about survival. Every sacrifice, every loss, had led to this moment. "Move out," Donovan shouted into his comms, his voice carrying the weight of authority. His own ship, a fast attack vessel painted with the scars of previous battles, shot forward with a roar of engines. The rest of the fleet followed, a swarm of desperate humanity charging toward the heart of the alien empire. The Silurian forces didn't hesitate. Their flagship lit up with deadly energy beams, streaking toward the incoming human ships. The air was thick with the sound of combat as humanity's Galactic fleet collided with the Silurian forces in a fierce, chaotic battle. Explosions rocked the atmosphere, illuminating the dark expanse of space. In the midst of the chaos, Donovan's team infiltrated the flagship. Their target, the command center. They fought through waves of Silurian soldiers, moving through corridors alive with alien energy, the air thick with tension. The hallways were lined with Silurian drones, but the human soldiers fought with a ferocity that none of the invaders had expected. This was no longer a fight for survival. It was a fight for their home, for their future. "Almost there," Alexia said as they reached the central chamber, the heart of the flagship. The alien control systems, enormous and pulsating with an eerie energy, towered over them. "Do it, Alexia," Donovan commanded, his eyes fixed on the central core of the alien systems. Alexia didn't hesitate. She hacked into the control panel, her fingers flying across the console. "System override initiated," she said, her voice tight with concentration. Then, with a deafening roar, the flagship's core exploded in a burst of light. The shockwave was felt throughout the space battlefield, and in that instant, the Silurian fleet froze. Humanity had done it. The alien fleet was paralyzed. The resistance had won. Back on Earth, General Hayes watched as the screens flickered, showing the images of the crippled Silurian ships. The tide of the war had turned. Humanity had not only survived, but had triumphed. They had fought against impossible odds, outsmarting and outlasting a superior force, proving that the human spirit was not so easily broken. "This is it," Hayes whispered to herself, a tear of relief escaping down her cheek. "We've done it. The Silurian Empire, once so powerful and seemingly unstoppable, had crumbled in the face of humanity's determination. Their control over Earth was no more. As the last remnants of the Silurian fleet disintegrated in space, Donovan and his team stood victorious, knowing that while this battle had been won, the real work was only just beginning. Humanity had proven it could overcome any obstacle, and from the ashes of the war, a new world would rise, one built on the strength, unity, and resilience of those who refused to give up.